The fuel invoices sat on my desk in 3 neat stacks. Overdue 30 days, overdue 60, overdue 90. I'd stopped opening the envelopes from the insurance company after the first dozen. They all said the same thing anyway. Partner's death under investigation, claim processing suspended indefinitely, policy review required. 6 months since Marcus augured in on what should have been a routine mail run to Anactivuk Pass. 6 months of me running Wagner Air Charter on fumes and credit I didn't have. The Cessna 207 needed new brake pads. The Beaver's engine was 200 hours past its inspection interval. I'd been putting off both, flying careful, landing softer than usual. Making do. Northern Alaska in March doesn't care much about making do, though. Sooner or later, something fails. And up here, that means you're walking out, or you're not walking anywhere ever again. I was adding numbers that didn't get better no matter how many times I rearranged them when my phone rang. Wagner Air Charter. Mr. Wagner, Dale Campbell, Kodiak Mining Corporation. We met briefly at the Fairbanks Aviation Expo last fall. I didn't remember him. A lot of corporate types passed through those expos, looking at aircraft they'd never sit in, asking questions about payload capacity like they understood the answers. Sure, I said. What can I do for you? We have a transportation need. Specialized equipment run from Fairbanks to Dead Horse, departing after 2,200 hours. Approximately 400 pounds of instrumentation. Time-sensitive delivery. Night flight up the Dalton Corridor. Straightforward enough, except nobody with legitimate cargo insisted on flying it in the dark unless they had a reason. I waited. The rate would be $6,500. My pen stopped moving. Standard rate for that run was maybe $1,000, $1,100 if you pushed it. I set the pen down carefully. That's generous. The timing requirements are non-negotiable, as is the flight path. His voice had that flat corporate quality, the kind that came from saying things that weren't really questions. We need absolute reliability, Mr. Wagner. Your record indicates you can provide that. My record. 2,000 hours flying bush routes, most of it in conditions that had ground pilots from anywhere with actual air traffic control. Also, partner dead, business circling the drain, and apparently desperate enough that it showed from however many miles away this guy was calling from. When's the flight? Friday night. We'll have a briefing Thursday afternoon at our Fairbanks facility, 2 o'clock. Does that work for your schedule? I looked at the invoices. $6,500 would cover the 90-day stack and half the 60. Get the insurance company off my back for another month, maybe 2. Buy time to find regular work, stabilize things. I'll be there. Excellent. I'll email the address and security clearance information. He paused, just a beat, like he was reading from notes. I should mention, other pilots have declined this contract. The route has a reputation. What kind of reputation? Perhaps we should discuss the details in person. Thursday at 2. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat there holding the phone, looking at those invoice stacks. 6 times the normal rate. Other pilots declining. A reputation. Nothing about that felt right. I made the drive to Fairbanks on Thursday morning. Gave myself time to ask around. The mining company had an office in a low industrial building off the Johansson Expressway, the kind of place that looked temporary, even though it had probably been there 20 years. But I didn't go there first. Tommy Kavik was fueling a Super Cub at the main aviation terminal when I found him. We'd flown together back when I was building ours, before I bought into Wagner Air with Marcus. Good pilot, careful. Kodiak Mining, I said, leaning against his wing strut. You know anything about their contracts? Tommy's hand stopped on the fuel nozzle. He looked at me, then went back to watching the numbers tick over on the pump. They offer you the Dead Horse run? Yeah. Don't take it. They're paying $6,500. He finished fueling, hung up the nozzle with more force than necessary. Melvin, I mean it. Don't. Why not? Devil's Canyon. That's why not. He wiped his hands on a rag, not looking at me. Flight path goes straight through it, and they only run at night. 12 pilots have taken that contract in the last 3 years. 4 of them didn't make it to Dead Horse. The math on that sat heavy. 1 in 3. Crashes? Vanished. No mayday, no ELT signal, no wreckage. Just gone. He finally met my eyes. Ben Thoreau took the contract last October. You remember Ben? I did. Solid pilot, flew for 20 years without bending metal. He's one of the 4? Tommy nodded. They found his aircraft 3 weeks later, scattered across 8 miles of canyon floor. NTSB couldn't determine cause. Weather was clear, no mechanical failure they could identify, no sign of what happened. And people keep taking the contract? Money's good, and most of them make it through fine, but 1 in 3, Melvin. He stuffed the rag in his pocket. Your call. Just wanted you to know. I went to the briefing anyway. The Kodiak mining office had that generic corporate feel. Gray carpet, white walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Campbell met me in the lobby himself. Tall guy, soft around the middle, suit that probably cost more than my monthly fuel budget. He shook my hand with the grip of someone who'd learned it from a training seminar. Mr. Wagner, appreciate your punctuality. He led me to a conference room with a map of Alaska spread across one wall. The Dalton Highway corridor was marked in blue, running north from Fairbanks to Dead Horse. A red section highlighted Devil's Canyon, maybe 40 miles of the route where the terrain pinched in tight. Coffee? I'm good. Campbell sat, folded his hands on the table. You've heard about the canyon. Wasn't a question. I nodded. Then you understand why the rate reflects additional risk. He slid a folder across the table. Standard contract. Liability waivers, insurance documentation, payment terms. You'll note we carry a substantial policy on all contractors. Your designated beneficiary would receive $200,000 in the event of an incident. 200 grand. More than the business was worth at this point. More than my life insurance policy, which I'd let lapse 2 months back when I couldn't make the premium. You're paying me to maybe die? We're paying you to follow instructions precisely. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, white, letter-sized, sealed with the company logo printed across the flap. These are your flight rules, 8 of them, non-negotiable. He set the envelope on the table between us. Didn't slide it over, just placed it there like it might be fragile. Pilots who follow these rules complete the route safely. Those who don't. He adjusted his glasses. The canyon has been problematic since 1967. Aircraft vanish. We've found a method that mitigates the risk. What kind of method? Open the envelope. I broke the seal. Single sheet of paper inside. 8 rules typed in clean block text. 1. Maintain altitude of exactly 2,500 feet through the canyon. Do not deviate. 2. Monitor emergency frequency, 121.5. Do not respond to any transmissions you receive. 3. If you experience engine anomalies, do not investigate. Continue on heading. 4. If navigation instruments fail completely, descend immediately to 1,000 feet and follow terrain. 5. You will see red beacons in sequence. Follow them precisely. 6. Keep the cockpit door open for the duration of canyon transit. 7. Do not use autopilot between the canyon entrance and exit markers. 8. Do not celebrate successful transit until you have landed at Dead Horse Airport. I read through them twice. Superstition dressed up as procedure. The kind of thing you'd expect from some bush legend, not a mining corporation with legal departments and safety protocols. This is serious? Completely. Campbell's expression hadn't changed. Flat. Professional. Every pilot who followed these rules reached Dead Horse safely. Every pilot who deviated did not. This is liability protection. You're covering yourselves legally by making the rules weird enough that any pilot who crashes can be blamed for not following them exactly. Believe what you prefer, Mr. Wagner. Follow the rules regardless. I looked at the paper again. Rule 6 stood out. Keep the cockpit door open. In March, flying north at night, that meant freezing my ass off for 40 miles. Pointless discomfort. But $6,500 and 200 grand if I augured in, which would at least clear the business debts, pay off what Marcus's family was owed. I folded the paper, slipped it back in the envelope. When do I get the cargo manifest? Campbell smiled. First expression I'd seen from him that looked close to human. Friday at the hangar, 2100 hours. We'll have the equipment loaded and ready. I signed the contract, took my copy and the envelope. Walked out of that office knowing I was doing something stupid, but doing it anyway because the numbers didn't work otherwise. The invoices were still sitting on my desk back home. The insurance company was still holding Marcus's claim. The Beaver still needed that engine inspection. Sometimes you take the bad option because all your options are bad, and at least this one paid enough to matter. I'd follow their rules, fly careful, get to Dead Horse, collect the money, and put this behind me. That was the plan anyway. I crossed into Devil's Canyon at midnight exactly. The GPS showed the coordinates where the canyon started, marked on Campbell's map in red. No physical landmark on the ground, just coordinates. But the air changed. Temperature dropped 4 degrees in 30 seconds. My breath fogged against the windscreen. The radio crackled. Static first. Then a voice, broken up by interference. Fairbanks Center, this is November 729er Delta Whiskey declaring an emergency. Engine failure, losing altitude. My call sign, my exact registration. I reached for the transmit button, stopped. Rule 2 sat on the seat beside me, printed in clean black letters. Monitor emergency frequency 121.5 without responding to transmissions. The voice came again. Fairbanks Center, November 7, 29er Delta Whiskey, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Complete power loss at 8,000 feet, 20 miles north of... I gripped the yoke tighter, kept my altitude at exactly 2,500 feet. The altimeter held steady. Requesting immediate assistance. Any aircraft on frequency. Different voice now. Same call sign. November 7, 29er Delta Whiskey experiencing catastrophic engine failure. Going down in... My engine purred smooth. All gauges green. Oil pressure 70 pounds. Fuel flow normal. Cylinder head temps in the middle of the operating range. The transmissions kept coming. 5 different voices in 3 minutes, all using my registration, all reporting emergencies. One sounded young, panicked. Another, calm, professional, running through emergency procedures as his aircraft fell. A third just breathing heavy into the mic, not speaking, terror in every ragged exhale. Then my name. Melvin, if you can hear this, please respond. The voice cracked. Melvin, I know you're out there. I need help. Engines quit. I'm at 4,000 feet and descending. Please, Melvin, please answer. My hand shook on the yoke. The voice knew me, spoke directly to me, not to air traffic control, not a distress call, a personal plea. Melvin Wagner, November 729er Delta Whiskey, I'm begging you. 3,000 feet now. Canyon floor coming up fast. If you can hear me, say something, anything. Just let me know someone's listening. I stared at the radio. The transmit button glowed faintly in the instrument panel lights. 1 press. That's all it would take. Rule 2. Don't respond. 2,000 feet, Melvin. I've got maybe 30 seconds, please. I don't want to die alone out here. Just talk to me, please. I reached over and switched to the backup frequency. 123.45. The alternate Campbell had written in the margin of the rules. The voice cut off mid-word. Silence filled the cockpit. Just the engine drone and the whisper of air past the fuselage. My instruments flickered. The altimeter spun backward, unwinding through 2,000 feet, 1,500, 800, then jumped to 12,000. The airspeed indicator showed 80 knots. I was flying at 130. The heading gyro rotated slowly, showing north when I was tracking northeast. Numbers scrolled across the GPS screen. Coordinates, altitude, ground speed. None of it matched what I was seeing outside or feeling in the controls. The aircraft flew stable, responding normally to inputs, but the instruments told a story of a plane spiraling out of control. I checked the magnetic compass mounted above the windscreen. Liquid-filled, no electronics, immune to electrical interference. It showed 035 degrees, my correct heading. The GPS cycled through another set of readings. Altitude negative 200 feet. Impossible. I'd be underground. Then I recognized the pattern. I'd seen these numbers before. In accident reports, Ben Thero's Cessna, the one Tommy mentioned, showed exactly these readings in the last 30 seconds of recorded flight data. Altitude negative 200 feet. Ground speed 420 knots. The NTSB called it instrument malfunction, sensor failure, but the numbers were right here on my panel. The GPS flickered again. New data. Altitude 6,200 feet, descending at 3,000 feet per minute. Those were from the Twin Otter that went down in '98. I'd read about it in trade publications. Pilot never made a distress call, just fell out of the sky with no explanation. My actual instruments, the ones that mattered, the ones that worked on physics, not electronics, told me I was straight and level at 2,500 feet. The turn coordinator showed wings level. The attitude indicator displayed the horizon exactly where it should be. Outside the windscreen, stars hung steady above the canyon rim. I flew by the backup instruments, ignored the GPS, ignored the digital displays, trusted the gyros and the magnetic compass and what I could see. The engine coughed. One cylinder missing. I felt it in the yoke, a slight vibration that hadn't been there before. The tachometer needle wavered, dropping 50 RPM, recovering, dropping again. Another cylinder cut out. The vibration increased. Engine running rough now, power fluctuating. I scanned the gauges. Fuel pressure steady. Magnetos firing. Oil pressure holding. Third cylinder gone. The engine shook hard enough to rattle the instrument panel. I throttled back, trying to smooth it out. Didn't help. Fourth cylinder quit. I was running on 2 out of 6 now, barely making enough power to maintain altitude. Rule 3. Continue on heading despite engine anomalies. I didn't touch anything. Didn't switch fuel tanks, didn't adjust mixture, didn't cycle the magnetos. The rules said continue. So I continued. The engine ran like contaminated fuel was flowing through it. Water in the tanks, maybe. Or bad gas, full of sediment. But I'd fueled up that morning with clean Avgas. Watched them pump it from the truck, checked the sumps myself for water contamination. Fifth cylinder stuttered and died. The whole aircraft shook. I was flying on 1 cylinder now, the propeller barely turning over, windmilling more than pulling. Altitude started dropping. 2,400 feet, 2,300. I pushed the yoke forward slightly, trading altitude for airspeed, trying to stretch the glide. The canyon floor was 1,500 feet below me. If the last cylinder quit, I had maybe 3 minutes before impact. Rule 3. Continue on heading. The red beacons appeared ahead. Lights mounted on the canyon walls, spaced a quarter-mile apart, marking the route through. Rule 5 said, follow them in sequence. I aimed for the first one. The last cylinder caught again. Rough, missing every third compression but firing. Then the second cylinder came back online. Third. Fourth. Within 30 seconds, all 6 cylinders were running smooth like nothing had happened. Power restored. Altitude climbing back to 2,500 feet. I checked the gauges again. Everything normal. Engine temp, oil pressure, fuel flow, all exactly where they should be. My hands were shaking. Through the windscreen, I saw wreckage on the canyon floor, scattered aluminum catching moonlight, bright against the dark rock. A wing section, mostly intact, with registration numbers still visible. November 8-4. Bravo Charlie. I didn't recognize it. More wreckage ahead. A tail section crumpled against a boulder, the vertical stabilizer bent at 90 degrees. Fresh paint. No weathering. but the metal was corroded like it had been there for years. Fuselage debris spread across 100 yards of canyon floor. Some pieces looked decades old, oxidized and deteriorating. Others appeared recent, paint still glossy, metal still bright. All of it in the same crash site, like aircraft from different eras had fallen in exactly the same spot. I counted 4 distinct tail numbers in the wreckage below me. 4 different aircraft, scattered together, metal twisted and torn. The moonlight made it all look silver and black, a graveyard stretching along the canyon bottom. The altimeter needle started spinning again, but different this time. Not the backward rotation from earlier. This was chaos. The needle swept from 2,500 feet to 8,000 in 3 seconds, then dropped to 400, then jumped to 11,000. No pattern, no logic, just the needle whipping around the dial while I held steady altitude, wings level, engine running smooth. I tapped the glass. Old habit. Useless. The gauge showed 15,000 feet. I could see canyon walls on both sides, maybe 300 feet away. The reading climbed to 18,000 while I flew straight through a corridor of rock that couldn't exist above 5,000 feet elevation. My backup altimeter joined the failure. The needle spun counterclockwise through impossible readings, negative 3,000 feet, then 22,000, then back to 0. Both instruments were gone. The GPS screen flickered. Coordinates dissolved into static, then displayed a position 200 miles north of my actual location, then showed me over the Pacific Ocean. The ground speed reading switched to 700 knots. Altitude showed negative 5,000 feet. Then the screen went black. I pressed the power button. Nothing. The unit was dead, and I was flying through Devil's Canyon at midnight with no functioning navigation equipment except the magnetic compass and my eyes. Rule 4. The words came back clean and immediate. If navigation instruments fail completely, descend to 1,000 feet and follow terrain. I pulled the throttle back and pushed the yoke forward. The Cessna's nose dropped, and the vertical speed indicator showed 500 feet per minute descent. At least that gauge still worked. The altimeter needles kept spinning uselessly, so I counted seconds and watched the canyon walls rise on either side as I came down. 30 seconds. I leveled off, scanning the terrain. The canyon floor was maybe 200 feet below, scattered with wreckage I'd seen earlier. The walls pressed closer here, narrowing to what looked like half a mile across. This was the tightest section yet. Red lights appeared ahead, not the quarter-mile spaced beacons from before. These were closer together, maybe 100 yards between each one, forming a line that curved through the narrowest part of the canyon. 6 beacons visible, then 7, then 8, as the path bent around an outcropping of rock. The lights were brighter than the previous ones, more focused, like runway edge markers, but mounted on the canyon walls at my altitude. I glanced at the GPS, still black. I checked the sectional chart clipped to my kneeboard, running my finger along the canyon route Campbell had marked. No navigation aids listed, no beacons, no markers, nothing but empty terrain notation. My eyes went back to the red lights. They were there, solid and steady, marking a clear path through rock that looked too narrow for safe passage. The cockpit instruments showed nothing. The navigation display was dead. The backup GPS unit mounted below the panel stayed dark when I pressed its power button. According to every piece of equipment I owned, those beacons didn't exist. I followed them anyway. The first light passed off my left wing, mounted on a steel pole anchored to the canyon wall. Real metal. Real light. I could see the mounting bracket and the power cable running down into the rock. The second beacon approached on my right side, identical construction, the red glow painting my wingtip. The canyon walls kept closing in. I was down to a quarter-mile of clearance, then less. The beacons curved right, and I banked to follow, keeping my wings level enough to fit through the gap. Rockface slid past 20 feet from my wingtip, too close. way too close for any sane pilot. I checked my mirrors. Force of habit. Clearing my six, making sure nothing was coming up behind me. The normal canyon route was gone. Where the main corridor should have been, where I'd flown in from, there was just solid rock wall. No gap. No opening. The entire passage I'd used to enter the canyon had sealed itself while I wasn't looking. Just blank stone, weathered and ancient like it had always been there. I was trapped. The only way out was forward, following beacons that didn't officially exist, through a gap that kept getting narrower. The temperature gauge on my panel read 42 degrees. I had the heater running full blast, both vents aimed at the windscreen to prevent fog. But my breath was condensing anyway, forming white clouds that hung in the air. I exhaled again. Thicker fog. I could see it clearly in the red glow from the beacons. The temperature gauge dropped to 38, then 34. I cranked the heater knob even though it was already maxed out, checking the control cable tension. Everything was set to full heat, 30 degrees. My fingers started going numb inside my gloves. I flexed them on the yoke, keeping circulation moving. The windscreen was fogging over from my breath despite the heater blast. I wiped it with my sleeve and the moisture was cold, nearly frozen. 26 degrees. I could see my breath with every exhale now. Thick white clouds that drifted back toward the passenger cabin. The metal yoke was cold enough to feel through my gloves. My feet were numb in my boots. 22 degrees, below freezing. The windscreen was icing over on the inside, frost forming in the corners and spreading inward. I kept wiping it clear with my sleeve, but the ice kept building. My hands were shaking from the cold. The 9th beacon passed. The 10th. The canyon was opening up slightly ahead. I could see the walls spreading apart, maybe half a mile of clearance coming up. The beacons led straight through the widening gap. My engine coughed. Not the cylinder-by-cylinder failure from before. This was different. A single rough cough, then smooth running, then another cough 3 seconds later. The engine died. Complete silence. The propeller windmilled in the airstream, spinning free without power, making a soft whistling sound. All 6 cylinders were dead. No sputtering, no missing, just instant total failure. My airspeed started bleeding off. 130 knots. 125. The nose wanted to drop, but I held it level, converting altitude to distance. I had maybe 200 feet between me and the canyon floor. Not enough for a landing, barely enough for a controlled crash. Rule 7. Keep cockpit door open during canyon transit. The door was already open. Had been since I entered the canyon. I'd left it unlatched like the rules specified, and it had drifted open on its own about 10 minutes back. I reached for the magneto switches anyway, going through the restart procedure. Both mags off, then back to both. Mixture rich. Throttle forward half an inch. Fuel pump on. I hit the starter. The propeller turned over. Slow cranking. The engine didn't catch. I tried again. The starter motor whined and the propeller rotated through 6 blades without firing. The airspeed read 110 knots. The windmilling prop was creating drag, slowing me down faster than a clean glide. I had maybe 30 seconds before I'd have to put it down on the canyon floor. I released the starter and sat in the silence. That's when I heard the voices. They came from behind me, from the passenger cabin. Male voices, 2 of them, talking in normal conversational tones like they were sitting in the seats discussing the flight. Fuel flows off. Check the selector again. I checked it twice. We're pulling from the mains. Then why's the gauge showing empty? I turned in my seat. The passenger cabin was empty. 4 seats, all vacant, no people, no cargo except the sealed containers Campbell's crew had loaded, strapped down in the rear section. Try switching tanks. We've got maybe 5 minutes before... It's not the tanks, Danny. Something's wrong with the feed line. The voices were clear. Not radio transmission, not recording. Actual voices in the cabin, close enough that I could hear the worry in their tone. One voice was younger, maybe mid-20s. The other was older, steady, trying to stay calm. "We're not gonna make Dead Horse. We need to set down." "Where? Look at the terrain. There's nowhere to put it." My hands were frozen on the yoke. The airspeed read 105 knots. The canyon floor was coming up, and I was listening to two dead men discuss navigation problems in a flight that had already ended in wreckage somewhere below. "Try the restart procedure again. Mags off, then both." "I did that 3 times. She's dead." Movement behind me. Not sound, exactly. Displacement. Air shifting where it shouldn't. I kept my hands on the yoke, didn't turn around. The voices continued their technical discussion about fuel selector positions and empty gauges, but now footsteps creaked across the cabin floor. 2 distinct patterns. One heavier, deliberate. One lighter, quicker. The airspeed indicator showed 98 knots. Maybe 20 seconds before I'd need to commit to putting her down on whatever section of canyon floor looked flattest. "Main tanks are bone dry," the older voice said. Closer now, directly behind my seat. "Should have switched to auxiliary 10 minutes ago." "I did switch." The younger voice, frustration bleeding through. "Selector's on AUK right now. Look at it." I looked. Couldn't help it. 4 passenger seats, all empty. Campbell's cargo containers strapped in the rear section exactly where I'd secured them. Nothing else, but shadows moved across the cabin ceiling. 2 human shapes, overlapping and indistinct, like figures projected through smoke. They passed between the seats, bent over invisible instruments, gestured at controls that didn't exist. "We're not going to make the field," the older voice said. "Statement of fact, no panic. Canyon's too narrow for a turnback. There's a gravel bar 2 miles ahead. Saw it on the way in." "At night? You're going to try a landing on unlit gravel you saw 12 hours ago?" The younger voice didn't answer. My airspeed hit 92 knots. The canyon floor rushed past below, close enough to count individual rocks in the starlight. I'd need to flare soon, bleed off speed before the stall warning screamed. More shadows materialized. A woman's voice, tight with controlled fear. "Frank, the oil pressure just dropped to 0. A man responded, different from the first 2. "I see it. Temperature's climbing." "We need to set her down now." "There's nowhere to set down. Look outside." I did look outside. Canyon walls on both sides, maybe 200 feet of clearance. Wreckage scattered across the floor where other pilots had tried exactly what these voices described. The shadows multiplied. 5 figures now, maybe 6, moving through the cabin in overlapping patterns. Some walked through the seats. Others bent over phantom controls, hands moving through empty air. A third male voice, younger than the others, breathing hard. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. November 4-7. Charlie Delta, engine failure, descending through—" "Save your breath," another voice cut in, flat, resigned. "Nobody's coming." The conversations layered over each other. Fuel starvation, oil pressure loss, electrical failure, navigation equipment malfunction. Each voice recounting the specific cascade of problems that had killed them. Final moments played out in my passenger cabin while I dropped toward the same canyon floor. 90 knots. The stall warning would trigger at 72. "Should have followed the altitude restriction," a woman's voice said, older with a Texas drawl. "Rules said maintain 2,500 feet. I thought I knew better." "We all thought we knew better," the first older voice responded. "That's why we're here." My engine caught. Single cylinder firing, then another, then all 6 roaring back to full power without any input from me. The propeller bit air, thrust building, airspeed stabilizing at 90 knots, then climbing. I pushed the throttle forward. The Cessna responded, nose lifting, altimeter winding upward through 1,200 feet, 1,500, 2,000. The voices faded, not cut off, just diminishing, like someone slowly turning down a radio. The shadows remained visible in my peripheral vision, seated now, occupying all 4 passenger positions. I could see the cabin structure through them. Outlines of heads and shoulders, hands folded in laps, faces turned toward the windscreen. Watching the same route they'd flown, the same canyon that had killed them. I climbed back to 2,500 feet and maintained it. The GPS flickered once, twice, then displayed correct coordinates again. Altimeter reading matched my altitude. Airspeed indicator showed 130 knots. The red beacons continued ahead, spaced wider now as the canyon opened up. I followed them north, keeping the wings level, hands steady on the yoke. The shadows sat quiet in the passenger seats, just visible in the corner of my eye. Every time I checked the mirrors, they were there. Every time I turned to look directly, the seats showed empty. 40 minutes later, the canyon walls fell away completely. Open tundra stretched ahead, flat and featureless under starlight. The GPS showed Dead Horse Airport 12 miles northeast. The shadows faded as I cleared the canyon mouth. Gone completely by the time I contacted Dead Horse Tower and received landing clearance for runway 01 left. I touched down at 1:43 in the morning, exactly on schedule according to Campbell's timeline. A black SUV sat parked beside the operations building, exhaust visible in the frigid air. Engine running, headlights off. I taxied to the transient parking area and shut down. Took me 3 tries to release my seatbelt. Hands weren't shaking, just wouldn't respond properly to what my brain told them to do. Campbell climbed out of the SUV as I opened the cabin door. Same expensive suit, different tie. He walked across the ramp with his hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the -20 air. "Any problems?" he asked. I looked at him. Didn't trust my voice yet. "You followed the rules." "Not a question. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here." "What the hell is that route?" I managed. Campbell glanced toward the south, where Devil's Canyon lay 40 miles away in the darkness. "A necessary corridor. Our mining claims are inaccessible by road, and daylight flights through that terrain have a worse safety record than night flights following the protocol." "The voices?" "You heard them." He nodded. "Most pilots do. Some see them too." "They were discussing how they died." "Yes." Campbell pulled a folded check from his inside pocket. "We've sent 23 pilots through the canyon this year. 7 have returned. You're number 8. I stared at him. 16 pilots didn't make it back. 16 pilots didn't follow the rules completely. Some deviated from altitude. Some responded to radio transmissions. Some tried to troubleshoot their engines instead of maintaining heading. He held out the check. The ones who followed every instruction exactly reached Dead Horse safely, without exception. I took the check. $6,500, made out to Wagner Air Charter. "You're running a system that kills 2 out of 3 pilots. We're offering a contract that pays extremely well for following specific instructions. What pilots choose to do with those instructions is their decision." Campbell turned back toward the SUV. "We'll need another flight next Thursday. Same route, same rate. Let me know by Monday if you're interested." He drove away before I could respond, taillights disappearing around the operations building. I stood on the frozen ramp holding a check worth more than my last 4 jobs combined, thinking about 16 sets of wreckage scattered across 40 miles of canyon floor. I held the check between numb fingers, watching Campbell's breath fog in the Arctic air. "Why this route?" He stopped with his hand on the SUV door. Turned back. "Geography." He said it flat, no embellishment. "Devil's Canyon provides the only viable flight path to our northern operations. 30 miles of mineral deposits accessed through 40 miles of haunted airspace." The wind carried ice crystals across the ramp. I waited. We surveyed every approach. Campbell walked 3 steps back toward me. "Helicopter range insufficient. Road construction cost projected at $400 million through permafrost and canyon walls. Winter ice roads collapse in the spring melt. Sled transport takes 8 days one direction." He gestured at my Cessna. Night flights through the canyon deliver cargo in 3 hours. Despite what's in there. He pulled his collar higher. The phenomena started in '67 when prospectors first reported anomalies, compass deviations, radio interference, missing survey teams. His breath came faster. Mining equipment disappeared. Supply drops vanished. 4 aircraft went down in the first year alone. My thumb traced the check's printed amount, $6,500. The rules came from survivors. Campbell's voice dropped. Trial and error. Every pilot who made it through reported what worked, what kept them alive. He counted on gloved fingers. Maintain 2,500 feet altitude. Don't respond to emergency transmissions. Continue on heading regardless of instrument readings. Follow the beacons. He lowered his hand. Each rule got refined when someone survived to explain what they did different. And the ones who didn't follow them? Contributed different data. No hesitation, no shame. We learned what kills pilots. Altitude deviations, radio responses, engine troubleshooting, closed cockpit doors. He met my eyes. Every crash taught us something. The operations building lights hummed against the darkness. I thought about 16 sets of wreckage scattered across 40 miles of frozen canyon floor. You're feeding pilots into that canyon. My voice came out steady, conversational, systematically. We're offering contracts. Campbell adjusted his tie. Voluntary employment at premium rates with comprehensive briefings and established safety protocols. He pulled a leather folder from his coat. Pilot deaths qualify as operational expenses. Tax deductible. Insurance covers the policies. We budget 8 to 10 fatalities annually. 8 to 10. The number sat there between us, visible as our frozen breath. Paying survivors costs less than alternatives. He opened the folder, showed me spreadsheets, columns of numbers. Your $6,000 run versus $400 million in road construction. 20 successful flights at $50,000 total versus 8 years of sled transport. His finger traced the calculations. Even accounting for life insurance payouts, aircraft replacement, and NTSB investigations, night flights maintain profitability. I looked at the spreadsheet, saw line items labeled pilot attrition and survivor bonuses and wreckage recovery, neat categories, clean accounting. The rules work. Campbell closed the folder. Every pilot who follows instructions exactly reaches dead horse. No exceptions. Those who improvise, who trust their training over the protocol, who think they know better. He gestured south toward the canyon. They contribute to the wreckage analysis. You're using the rules as bait. We're providing tested survival procedures. He tucked the folder away. What pilots do with that information remains their choice. The wind shifted, carried the smell of aviation fuel and frozen earth. I understood it then. The whole system. Kodiak Mining had calculated the margins, determined that supernatural hazards cost less than conventional logistics, accepted that most pilots would die, while a few survivors generated enough successful runs to maintain operations. The protective rules ensured some flights succeeded, just enough to prove the route worked, to justify the next contract, to keep pilots signing agreements. The company treated the haunted canyon as a business challenge, a logistics problem with acceptable casualty rates. 16 pilots this year, 23 attempts, 8 returns. 65% fatality rate, rounded up. My hand still held the check. $6,500, more than my last 4 jobs combined, enough to pay 3 months of fuel invoices, enough to buy brake pads for the Cessna and schedule the Beaver's overdue engine inspection, enough to keep Wagner Air Charter operating through March. Blood money. I knew it, recognized it, understood exactly what I was holding. Campbell watched me with the patience of someone who'd seen this calculation performed before. The Thursday flight pays the same rate. Monthly runs thereafter at $6,500 per trip. Designated route, same protocols, same insurance coverage. How many pilots you got running this? Currently 3, including you. Lost 2 in November. 1 quit after his first run. He pulled out his phone, checked something. Monthly runs generate reliable income. 12 flights annually at $78,000 total compensation. $78,000. I thought about Marcus's insurance claim suspended 6 months, about the 90-day overdue invoices stacked on my desk, about the Beaver's engine running 200 hours past inspection interval, every flight risking catastrophic failure because I couldn't afford the $15,000 overhaul. I thought about the voices in my passenger cabin discussing their deaths, about shadows moving through empty seats, about the woman who said they'd all thought they knew better than the rules. I need the contract. My voice sounded distant. Someone else's words. Campbell produced the leather folder again. Different document this time. Monthly service agreement. First Thursday of each month, weather permitting. Same cargo, same route, same compensation. He handed me a pen. Insurance beneficiary information transfers from your initial contract. The pen felt heavy. I read through the terms. 12 flights, $78,000, life insurance policy active for each individual flight, liability waivers, NTSB cooperation clauses, next of kin notification procedures. Standard operational language for systematically sacrificing pilots. I signed it, signed my name on 3 pages, initialed 4 more, dated the final sheet January 19th at 1:57 a.m. Campbell collected the documents, slid them into the folder, extended his hand. First monthly flight scheduled for February 2nd. Cargo loading at 2100 hours Fairbanks. I shook his hand. His grip was warm despite the cold. Follow the rules exactly. He released my hand. Every time. No variations. Understood. He walked to the SUV, climbed in, started the engine. The headlights came on, illuminating the frozen ramp and my aircraft in the operations building. He drove away without looking back. I stood there holding the check and watching his taillights disappear south toward the highway. 12 flights at 65% fatality rate meant I had maybe 4 successful runs before the statistics caught me. Maybe 5 if I stayed lucky. Maybe I'd beat the odds entirely, join the 3% who survived a full year of monthly transits. Or maybe I'd end up as a voice in someone else's passenger cabin, discussing fuel system failures and navigation errors while they flew through my wreckage. I folded the check, tucked it in my jacket pocket, and walked back to my aircraft to begin pre-flight for the return trip south. I stood there with Campbell's check in my jacket pocket, the contract pages spread across the SUV's hood, and the numbers ran through my head whether I wanted them to or not. 6,500 per run. 12 runs a year if I lasted. 78,000 total if the odds didn't catch me first. The math on the other side was simpler. 3 stacks of invoices sitting on my desk back in Anchorage, organized by how long the fuel suppliers had been waiting. The Beaver's engine 200 hours past inspection with metal shavings starting to show up in the oil filter. Marcus's insurance claim suspended indefinitely while the company found creative ways to avoid paying out on a crash they couldn't explain. Wagner Air Charter had maybe 6 weeks left before the suppliers stopped extending credit and started filing liens. I picked up the pen Campbell had left on the hood. Black ink, expensive weight, company logo stamped on the barrel. My fingers were still numb from the cockpit cold and the pen felt awkward in my grip. Campbell stood beside his SUV with the engine running, not pushing, just waiting. He'd done this before. He knew how the calculation worked because he'd watched other pilots make it. The thing was, refusing wouldn't change anything. Campbell had 3 pilots now, including me. If I walked away, he'd have 2. By next week, he'd have 3 again because there were always guys like me, experienced enough to handle the flying, desperate enough to ignore the wreckage count, broke enough that 6,500 looked worth the risk. Tommy Kavik had told me 4 out of 12 pilots vanished. Campbell's spreadsheet said 16 dead this year with 7 survivors. The numbers didn't match because Kavik was counting a longer time frame, but the ratio stayed consistent. Most didn't make it. Some did. The company budgeted for both outcomes and kept operating because dead pilots cost less than building roads through permafrost. If I said no, some other broke charter operator would say yes. Probably within 48 hours, Campbell would make the same offer, show the same spreadsheet, explain the same rules. That pilot would either follow the instructions and survive, or improvise and join the wreckage. Either way, Kodiak Mining would get their cargo through Devil's Canyon. My refusing didn't save anyone. It just meant I went bankrupt while someone else took the contract. I'd survived the canyon by doing exactly what Campbell's rules specified: 2,500 feet altitude through the marked corridor. Emergency frequency monitored but never answered. Heading maintained regardless of instrument failures. Red beacons followed in sequence. The rules had worked because I'd trusted them completely. Even when every piece of training I'd ever received said troubleshoot the engine, respond to the Mayday calls, climb above the terrain. 20 years of flying had taught me protocols designed to keep pilots alive in normal airspace. Devil's Canyon wasn't normal. The rules Campbell provided came from trial and error, from pilots who'd survived long enough to explain what they'd done right, and from crash investigations showing what the dead had done wrong. Maintain altitude, don't respond, keep flying, follow the beacons. Every pilot who'd followed those instructions exactly had reached Dead Horse. Campbell had been clear about that. No exceptions. The protocol worked if you trusted it. But 16 pilots hadn't trusted it this year. 16 had decided their training mattered more than Campbell's rules, or panicked when instruments failed, or responded to voices using their registration numbers. 16 had made logical decisions based on sound aviation practice. All 16 were dead. I'd made it because I'd ignored my training and followed instructions I didn't understand. Because I'd sat there with my engine dying and my navigation equipment showing impossible readings and done nothing except maintain heading. Because I'd heard voices discussing their deaths in my passenger cabin and kept flying instead of trying to figure out what was happening. The cost of my survival was understanding that system. 7 pilots had made successful runs, 16 had died. Campbell's budget accommodated both numbers because the successful runs generated enough value to offset the fatal ones. I was one of 7. Not because I was better than the 16, because I'd followed arbitrary rules while they'd trusted their experience. Standing on the Dead Horse ramp at 2 a.m. with Arctic wind cutting through my jacket, I understood exactly what Campbell was offering. Monthly income that would cover my fuel invoices, pay for the Beaver's engine overhaul, maybe even get the insurance company to release Marcus's claim once I demonstrated financial stability. All I had to do was fly through Devil's Canyon 12 times a year and trust that the rules would keep working. 65% fatality rate. Campbell's numbers, not mine. 8 to 10 pilots dead annually out of the pool they maintained. I'd survived 1 run. 12 more would take me through a full year of monthly contracts. Statistics said I wouldn't make it, but statistics were averages across all the pilots Campbell hired, including the ones who panicked or improvised or decided their training mattered more than the protocol. The survival rate for pilots who followed the rules exactly was different. Campbell claimed it was 100%. I didn't know if I believed that. But I'd followed the rules on my first run, and I was standing here alive with a check in my pocket, while 16 other pilots were scattered across 40 miles of canyon floor. The company's system required desperate pilots. Guys with failing businesses and suspended insurance claims and aircraft running past inspection intervals. Guys who needed money badly enough to accept supernatural hazards as operational conditions. Campbell wasn't forcing anyone. He was offering contracts to people who'd already run out of better options. I was one of those people. Had been since Marcus crashed 6 months ago, and the insurance company started finding reasons to delay payment. Other pilots would keep taking these contracts whether I did or not. The difference was I'd already survived once. I knew what to expect now. The radio transmissions using my registration, the instrument failures, the engine cutting out, the voices in the passenger cabin. None of it had killed me because I'd followed the protocol. 12 more runs, 6,500 each. Maybe I'd beat the statistics entirely. Maybe I'd be the 3% who survived a full year. Maybe I'd join the voices. But my refusing didn't change the system. It just meant someone else filled my slot while my business collapsed. I looked at the contract, standard monthly service agreement, same cargo, same route, same compensation, insurance beneficiary information, liability waivers, NTSB cooperation clauses, next of kin notification procedures. Campbell had prepared this before I'd even landed. He'd known I would sign. My hand was steadier now. The pen felt normal weight. I put the tip to the signature line on the first page and wrote my name. Moved to the second page and initialed the margin. Third page, another signature. Fourth through seventh pages, initials on each. Final page required signature and date. I signed Melvin Wagner in the space provided, then wrote January 19th at 1:57 a.m. on the date line. Campbell took the pages, folded them into thirds, and slid them into his leather folder. First run is February 2nd, cargo loading at 2100 hours in Fairbanks, same hangar. I'll be there. Follow the rules exactly, no variations. Understood. He climbed into the SUV and drove away across the frozen ramp, taillights disappearing toward the access road. I stood there holding nothing now, both hands empty. The check was in my jacket pocket. The contract was in Campbell's folder. I'd committed to flying Devil's Canyon 12 times in the next year, betting my life each time that the rules would protect me while other pilots died.